Welcome to all present. The title of this panel is What Inclusive Instructors Do and Why It Matters. The members of this panel were part of an ETE learning circle that read and discussed the book What Inclusive Instructors Do in fall 2024. And this was after the Utah Legislature passed the controversial Equal Opportunity Initiative HB 261. And Utah State Board of Education affirmed that this would in no way impact our academic freedom in the classroom or in our research. And the panelists have been exploring the question, how do we move forward, especially teaching post HB 261. Our presenters are lead presenter Marlene Graf, who is professional practice associate professor in the Department of Nutrition, Dietetics, and Food Services at USU. Sofia Monzon Rodriguez, who is assistant professor of translation and co-director of the Translation and Interpretation program at USU. And Junjie Tang, who is a PhD student and graduate research assistant in civil and environmental engineering at USU, and Angela Montague, who is professional practice assistant professor in anthropology also at USU. Thank you. Thanks for being here, everyone. Not everyone stays for the afternoon session, so if I could give you extra credit, I would. All right. Yeah. As Maria said, the four of us were part of a learning circle, and we got together last fall. This is only part of us. There were more who weren't able to join today. I think we had 8 or 9, maybe 10. But this was here's the intro. So inclusive teaching practices have always been a core element of effective and meaningful education. Even after courses ended and final grades have been assigned, the impact of intentional and instructive instruction continues. So I feel like most instructors at USU are pretty inclusive and intentional and committed to excellent teaching, but House Bill 261 has created some concern and confusion. And so for this presentation, we want to talk about what inclusive teaching means, why it's impactful and important, but also how do we do it in a way where we're still following all the rules with House Bill 261. So here's an outline of where we're going to go. I'll start with a quick intro and talk about the book that we read and kind of an overview of that. And then Junjie is going to talk about inclusive teaching, what that means. Sofia will talk about why it matters. And then Angela is going to talk about principles of course design. And then we'll go in reverse order and each share an idea or a practical tip for implementing inclusive teaching in the classroom. So here's what the book looks like that we read, and the authors are listed there. Tracy Addy was the lead author, and this book came about after a survey of several university instructors from various disciplines, and they were asked these 3 things: define what inclusive teaching means, identify strategies that you use to promote inclusivity, and then discuss what your institutions are doing to implement inclusive teaching practices. And so initially it was a journal publication, and then it became a book. And so it's organized into 3 parts. Here's what the table of contents look like. And there's 2 major themes. The first theme is about designing courses that are equitable and that set all students up for success and give them opportunities to thrive and succeed. And then the second theme is how to foster a sense of belonging and create classrooms that are welcoming and inviting so that students can learn.
So here are 4 terms that should sound familiar, but it's worth redefining them. Equality means everything's distributed equally. Equity is different in that it's more customized and it addresses inequality. And then justice goes a step beyond that and actually fixes the system so there's equal access and opportunity for everyone, regardless of demographics. So I want to mention this website as a reference. This is a USU website, and it talks about House Bill 261 and gives some guidance to instructors. For example, here is a sample paragraph to put in your syllabi, or here are things that you can and can't do, and to stay compliant. So what is encouraging on this website is that it says that, yes, we can still absolutely be inclusive instructors and use inclusive teaching practices because those are evidence-based and they are important. So that's something to reference if you want. All right, Junjie.
Thank you, Marlene.
Yeah.
So I will talk about the definition of inclusive teaching. So basically, there are so many different understandings introduced by the book to learn how the inclusive teaching is defined. But generally, the inclusive teaching is designed to have a learning environment that fosters a sense of belongings. So 3 aspects are here. The first one is equitable, which means all the students have access to resources and support their need to succeed academically. The next one is welcoming, like all students are valued and respected and encouraged to contribute to the learning community. The last one is diverse, where the unique backgrounds and experience of students are acknowledged and no one is excluded. So just for inclusive teaching, we want to create a welcoming environment that everyone would be part of the class and no one would be excluded. So to better understand the inclusive teaching, there are 2 essential aspects we want to talk about. The first one is equity, another one is social belonging. So equity, creating a classroom environment where all students can succeed, regardless of their background or identity. So instructors consider the needs of goals of students, and then we help them to succeed throughout all kinds of strategies. One example here I want to share with you is about the cultural norms. So, as an international student, in our cultural norms, we are educated to ask questions after class, not during the class time. Because we think if you ask questions during the class time, that would interrupt the progress of the course content. Or if you really want to ask some questions, you should raise your hand first. And once you are allowed to ask questions, you need to stand up. So which is totally different from the learning norms here. So, but for the equitable learning, everyone should have this sense of making adjustments, and you are welcome to behave like the domestic students here to learn the course material. And once we have this kind of equitable feeling, that will enhance the social belonging. So as the note speaker who mentioned this morning, once we have a better sense of belonging, the students could have a better GPA or even a better academic achievements. So this is because, social belonging identifies with members of a group is a basic human need. And students should not feel left out or alone. So whenever they feel like they are not part of the class, that would set some kind of barriers for them to study during the class. And another part is instructors should help learners increase their perception of belongings by evaluating their cultural and life experience in the present learning context. So here, it gives a very good strategy to think about designing the course, which is the cultural relationship between the perspective or different backgrounds with the course content. So if we can design some learning opportunities that can tap into students' culture, that could enhance their motivation and even the engagement with the material. And then in that way, they can have a better, a more positive attitude towards throughout the culturally relevant learning. So this is just some like basic understanding about how we can understand the inclusive teaching. And then I also gave an example or the reason to explain why should we care the inclusive teaching. Because the composition of our students could be complicated. Like we may face students who are first-generation students, which means there are so many uncertainties for them. Because as the first-generation students, it's not easy for them to seek for some help from their parents or family because they are just first generation. And then there could be more challenges for them to learn how to study or even better manage their time during class. So there are some other underrepresented groups as well, like non-traditional adult learners or international students, something like that. Just when we keep this inclusive teaching in mind, we would think about, okay, for different backgrounds, for students who have different backgrounds or they have different challenges, we could develop better learning environments that can support their success. So this is just one reason to think about why inclusive teaching is important. And I would like Sofia to explain more reasons to think about inclusive teaching.
Thanks. Is it even working? Do you guys think it's working? Okay. It's quite quiet. Right? Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I'll just hold it in my hand. And I don't want to go far away. Is it okay if I just do this? Yeah, I'll just stay here. So I'm going to be talking about why inclusive teaching matters, but I want to start with some universal preconceptions that we probably all share here. Last time I checked, we are still human beings, right? Seeking connections. AI hasn't taken over yet. So in those connections that we seek, we also seek to be affected and to affect others, right? That's why we are connecting. That's why we are relational beings. Also, literature shows that we learn better by being in the midst. That's affect theory right there, a little bit of my background. But it makes sense. We learn better when we are part of the learning process, right? So why inclusive teaching matters? Marlene has already mentioned the distinction, right? Equity doesn't equal equality, right? Inclusive teaching gives students what they need to succeed, just not the same treatment, right? That will be equality. Belonging fuels achievement. Students who feel valued, seen, and supported are more likely to persist, especially those from underrepresented or marginalized groups, as just my colleague mentioned. Also, diverse students bring in diverse strengths. Inclusive instructors view diversity as an asset, not as a deficit or a liability in the classroom. And finally, this is being backed up by literature, right? We have evidence-based results in this topic. Social belonging and inclusive environments have shown to increase GPA, engagement, and retention, particularly for first-generation, low-income, and racialized, minoritized students, much like the keynote speaker mentioned in his wonderful presentation this morning. But why does this really truly matters beyond the grade? Going back to the topic of the conference. And what's the real impact that we can bring into the classroom beyond just, the traditional grading system, right? We learned this morning that grades are not the only or sole measure of success, or how we can measure student success in the classroom. What inclusive teachers do is that they foster critical thinking, which is grounded in multiple perspectives that all the students bring into the classroom, and the instructors too, right? Resilience too is one of the things that inclusive teaching fosters. Resilience in navigating institutional barriers. It also fosters long-term educational equity rather than the short-term academic compliance that grades or the traditional grading system will bring in. It's looking forward, long-term kind of vision. And finally, confidence and self-advocacy, right? Especially for students who might otherwise feel marginalized or don't have representation and role models, right, to look up to. There we go. And now bringing it back to the perspective of the instructors, like the teachers, these are some of the keywords that you might think of the mindset of what an inclusive teacher or instructor would do or would have. Awareness is the first one probably that comes to mind. Inclusive instructors intentionally learn who their students are, their identities, their needs, their assets at the institutional, departmental, program, and of course, classroom levels. Doesn't mean that we need to know all of them on a personal basis, but we need to know who they are and who they want to be, perhaps, right? To continue that sort of connection with them beyond the classroom. Also, empathy is another keyword that truly comes to mind and resonates with what inclusive instructors try to do. They teach the whole student. It's a holistic sort of perspective, right? Not just cognitive ability or terminology or whatever you want to teach them. They design their courses for real people, not just abstractions. Responsibility is another important one. Inclusion is not externally enforced, regardless of the office of DEI or whatever. It's something that it should be part, right, of our role as educators and also part of our daily choices when we go to the classroom, beyond designing our syllabus, right? Should be a choice that we make every day when we teach. And finally, it's growth-oriented, right? Inclusive instructors see themselves as learners, embrace their limitations, meaning discomforts, they seek and take into consideration feedback. They put themselves out there, they become vulnerable, and they change, right, within the whole group and the classroom. So finally, some recommendations. Recognize and disrupt deficit thinking, meaning don't assume that students are lacking something. They're just who they are, and they will be part of a bigger group, that social belonging that my colleagues were talking about. Also, I invite you to affirm identities and mitigate stereotype threat. With some examples, it's as simple as strategies. It might not be as simple as the book says, but we are going to be talking about one at the end of the presentation, value affirmation exercises. I also propose that you create brave spaces where diverse perspectives are invited, not feared. We all talk about the safe space and stuff, but make it meaningful. Right? Don't just say it at the beginning of the semester. Make it count truly. And finally, tackle real-world barriers. Don't be afraid of not talking about certain topics because they are difficult or hard, or you just don't want to talk about that, right? Expose them, mention them in the classroom, and enhance that critical thinking, right? Finally, a little takeaway is that inclusive teaching isn't just a checklist that we should all be, looking forward to cross out of the list. It's relational, reflective. It's a student-centered practice that increases equity, well-being, and long-term success for our students. So with that, we're going to see some applications. So, yeah, Angela.
So I guess with that, we have heard the what of inclusive teaching and the why. So I'll just talk a little bit about how to put theory into practice. Design principles that are inclusive are going to be inviting. They are going to include variety, and that's at the structural as well as the content level, and be transparent where possible. So inclusive design, how do we make it inviting? How do we foster that sense of belonging? The book talks about really being intentional with our syllabi. Set the tone for your class with your syllabus. And they have some different definitions and examples. And really they're talking about, how are you going to invite your students to feel welcome? Do you want to include a welcome statement? We can have a diversity statement. I include a statement that I'll respect and use your preferred name and pronouns. I love that a lot of these are like blocks in our Canvas syllabus now. The mental health statement, I love that one. I do bring in something, like you mentioned, caregiving responsibilities. Let them know, like, this class has this kind of amount of work, let me know if you are caring for an elderly parent or children or, you know, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. And we'll also talk about a strategy for that. Also including diverse voices. How are you going to convey to your students that they have a place in this field of study? And one way to do that is to look at your syllabus, who's missing, what voices are missing, and find them. Our library has a great resource page on finding multiply marginalized and underrepresented authors. It's a whole page. I know Cree Taylor helped develop that a few years ago. You can Google, or search it, sorry, on the library website, finding and using multiply marginalized and underrepresented scholars. Find out who your students are. We've already talked about that. Who are they? How can you incorporate their lived experience and assignments and content that resonates with that? And the who's in class forum, which we'll talk about, is a great way. And then, you know, basic andragogy, you know, adult learning, pedagogy. How can you provide ways for students to take an active role? I'll talk about a syllabus curation assignment that I do. Variety, now again at the content and the structure level, how can you incorporate different modalities? And I think ETE or CD has been really good about helping with this, having low stakes and high stakes assignments, multiple choice, written, doing maybe choose your own adventure pathways. I have colleagues who, you know, you can pick what your final is. Also, I think Junjie talked about this, being aware of some of your assumptions about what students come to the class, what we sometimes call that hidden curriculum. I noted halfway through a class, do my students know how to read an academic article? And maybe not in a lacking way, but like, some of them don't, and they would get lost in the weeds. They really wouldn't know how to find, like, what is the point of this article? What am I supposed to take away? So at the structural level, how can we provide some meta teaching along with the content? How can you read this article? Do they know what citations are? I'm thinking no, but that's, you know, something, again, maybe I'm the one lacking. I'm not realizing that, you know, I had a student who'd been out of school for 10, 15 years, and she's like, I think I learned that in high school, but I don't remember. So building that in and really doing it at the whole level, not just a student who, you know, oh, they don't know that, I'll teach them on the side, but just building that into our coursework. And then accounting for resource disparities. Sofia, you talked about that. I guess we've all kind of talked about these things, but, you know, are there open access, open educational resources you can have instead of a really expensive textbook? I like to try to get a hard copy of my book, since most of my course materials are ebooks now, so that there's a hard copy. I know a lot of us read better when it's, you know, a physical copy. And I love, the book talked about having an FAQ section in our syllabus, or putting that on Canvas, trying to kind of anticipate and preemptively answer questions. So students who may not feel comfortable doing that can go, okay, what if I can't afford the course materials? FAQ right there. I've put in there, you know, like there's some scholarships I can make available for some of the resources that I use that are third-party type resources. Transparency is huge. I think that's, you know, obviously part of universal design for learning principles. Also setting expectations, and again, getting buy-in from students. So how can we have like a discussion where we set up, what does inclusive classroom citizenship look like? Get your students' input. Let them set some of those parameters and talk about what's important to them. What will we do when somebody says something harmful, or, you know, not shun that person, but what do we want to do as a class? And when we're doing our assignments, don't just say what the assignment is, but have some rationale in there. Why are you assigning this? Does it attach to one of your objectives? Be transparent. It really helps students get buy-in, right? How will these students meet the requirements of the assignment? That, I think, is a great way to get beyond that hidden curriculum, especially for first-generation students, students that don't just come in with that academic culture. So how will they meet those requirements? Rubrics are amazing. They also make grading a lot smoother. And this is just an image of universal design for learning principles, the what, why, and how. So we'll talk now about some of ideas and strategies that we have implemented. I think I've already talked about the inclusive syllabus. You know, we can have a DEI statement as it aligns with our course content. We can use just welcoming language. We can cast our net really wide, make sure that information is there, that it's clear, that it's accessible, even down to how do you want your students to contact you? I had a student thank me just for saying, please use Canvas inbox, you know? And I'm like, thank you. Sometimes I don't know. Tell them how you want to be addressed. Do you want to be Dr. Montague or Professor or hey, Angela or whatever? Let them know. And to really get some strategic buy-in and also to fix a problem I have, which is for a topic I love, I usually have too much material. And I've always thought, wow, what if I could just sit down with the students and ask them what they want to learn? And that's where I came up with, I mean, it's probably not a new thing, but I call it a syllabus curation assignment. I have students choose a topic relevant to the course. I often give them a list. They will learn how to use library databases. I'll often have the librarian come in to find articles that are relevant to the course, so some anthropology-specific stuff maybe in those databases. They get practice reading the articles, pulling out the key points, and then they assign an article or two to the class, and they run discussion. So they facilitate and write the discussion questions based on the articles they've chosen. I find that students are very willing and excited. You get a lot of, I guess, that sense of belonging, but also ownership over the material. And I've also done this in a class where they had, one of the readings did have to be by an underrepresented author. So they also got kind of practice in how do we find somebody that is not represented often in this course.
And I think I promised I was going to talk a little bit about values, affirmation, activities, or exercises. And I said that the book said it was simple, but it can be as complicated as you want them to be, honestly, and as long and as tedious as you want them to be. Mine is one of the simple ones, and it has worked for me really well in the language context. That's what I teach. I teach translation and interpretation courses. So what I have, how I've implemented this is an example for you, is at the beginning of the semester, I invite students to reflect, write, and then the next session they will share a short bio note, I call it, but you can call it language biography. You can come up with a fancier word for it if you want. And I ask them to explore the relationship with the language, or I guess the working languages, because we are always going between languages. So in my case, Spanish and English. Some of the guiding questions, there are more, but these are the three that are kind of like the beginning of this little questionnaire. And they're guiding questions. They choose what to answer kind of thing. One is, where and when do you learn your first and second languages? What's your relationship with your L1 or L and L2? Or how has learning a second language or that specific language, like English or Spanish, shape your identity, right? How do you see yourself? How do you embody that language that you now speak or own, right? It's part of you. And then the next session, we come back to the classroom and we all sit in a circle, and each student introduces themselves through this lens by sharing their language biography or the bio note. And I found that this really creates a space for vulnerability. They get to share things that they normally haven't even thought about before. There's also room for self-awareness and obviously connections, because, you know, when it comes to English and more so with Spanish, you can find people who learn in Spain or people who learn in Argentina, or they have like this different accent, right? So they kind of, you know, recognize that in their peers, and it really creates connection. Sometimes competition too, but I joke about that. So low stakes too. And why I think this works, for me, really grounds, the activity is grounded in students' lived linguistic experiences, and that's who they are, right, and who they are becoming in the classroom and in their lives too. It highlights the diverse paths to bilingualism. So some of them are heritage speakers. They learn those two languages at home. through their families. Some of them are mission learners, most of them here in USU. And some of them are also classroom learners, so more like the traditional learners who just took Spanish in, I don't know, high school or whatever. And I really find that this truly breaks down certain assumptions that we have about languages and learning a language. It truly builds empathy, and I really want to reinforce that one. And finally, it fosters collaboration over comparison. Sometimes they compare each other, but in the end, they're like, oh my God, I love your accent. Like, I want to speak like you, or teach me more about those languages and those swear words that you learned in Spain. Stuff like that, you know. And finally, you know, students really begin to see linguistic identity as an asset and not as a deficit, which is what the whole thing about inclusive teaching that we brought up at the beginning. And not just for themselves, right? They recognize that in themselves, but they also see that as a group, right? They see that in their peers as well. So that's kind of like I've implemented this values affirmation little activity.
So this is another idea you could think about to creating a welcome environment by learning students' name and also how to pronounce them correctly. You know, at the beginning of the semester, we usually have this introduction part to know our students better. And at that time, we could ask what name would you like me, instructors, to use in class, and how to pronounce the names correctly, especially for some unfamiliar or uncommon names. So take an example as myself. My first name, Junjie, is like the 6 months of the year, June. For the another part, is like Jack without K. So my name is pronounced as Junjie. Is there any special meaning behind this name? Yes. So in Chinese culture, Junjie means handsome and outgoing and outstanding, which is kind of the expectations from my parents, you know. So by asking kind of special meanings or any stories of their names can help build this kind of trust and respect between students and instructors. And in that way, that will encourage the participation and a better connection with our students as well.
Okay, so one last idea. This is an idea from the book. The authors call it the Who's in Class form. And I've tried this out probably 3 or 4 semesters. And here's an example of the instructions I give. I say, please respond to any questions on this form that you're willing to answer. There are 20. This is optional, so you can answer all of them. Some of them or none of them. The goal of this questionnaire is to help me understand who's in this class so I can provide appropriate support. And then the questions are in sections, and they click the next button to advance. So it's on a Google form. And I'm just going to share examples of the open-ended questions. Number 1, do you have any concerns related to this class that you want me to know about? And sometimes they don't, so they can type no or any. But here's an example of a response. I have 15 minutes to get from my chemistry class at one end of campus to this classroom in the NFS building on the other side of campus. And I can't do that in 15 minutes. So that's good to know because it helps me adjust like what I do at the beginning of class, and I can teach some routes to get from the chemistry building to my building because I've learned all of the fast routes. Another question, in your opinion, what makes the class feel warm, welcoming, and inclusive? And this is often my favorite one to read. So this is what one student said: when a professor recognizes and knows their students and students recognize and know each other. I think it's really important, especially at the beginning of the semester, to set aside time for everyone to get acquainted, even if it's at a surface level. And this is a response that comes up over and over again. I've found that most students actually do like opportunities to have icebreaker games or get to know each other. And there have been a few times where I've just like made one whole class period a get to know you class period, and they have seemed to really appreciate that. And then 20, what is something that you're excited about or looking forward to in this class? And that tends to help them get excited and get off to a good start, and kind of share what their expectations are and help me know what they're hoping for. So with that form, the good part is that it gives me some helpful information. The one drawback that I've noticed is that it can feel overwhelming to me as an instructor, especially if I get lots of responses or if I'm teaching lots of classes. And so my strategy going forward is going to be to shorten that, or maybe to not call it a who's in class form, but more of a let's get to know each other or something. But I think it has been important to give them opportunities to build a community from the beginning. So in conclusion, one message of this book is that accommodations don't give an advantage, they remove a barrier and help make learning more equitable. Also, Angela talked a lot about universal design, and there's a lot of resources and information about universal design, and so here are a few illustrations to get started, but you can really go down a rabbit hole and learn more about all of those elements. And then here's a resource that we wanted to share from AQ, which is the Association of College and University Educators. So we're happy to share this PDF with anyone who would like it. You just need to send me an email and I'd be happy to share that. So it's 10 strategies for ways to be inclusive. Also, like I mentioned earlier, this isn't our whole group. Stephen joined us, and Xavier was also in our learning circle. Xavier kind of spearheaded an article for the Journal on Empowering Teaching Excellence. It's still in process, but at some point we'll finish that up. I feel like I should let you add anything you want to add, Stephen, since we have some extra time, since we're at the end. Yeah. Here, let me bring this to you. Here we go.
So real quick, this is kind of a testament to Marlene Graf, because she was the one that inspired everybody to come together in this inclusion circle. She gave a Spark talk last year about the book, and I think most of us signed up for it right on the spot. And I would throw out that I have used the Who's in Class in every class since then, and it is incredible what students are willing to share, just in terms of what their life experience is, how they self-identify, what kind of hardships they might have, and it genuinely made a difference in terms of how I approached the class. After I did it, it was a week 1 assignment. It's a week 1 assignment in every class now, and then come week 2, you have kind of a, I don't want to say like a warm spot in your heart for these kids already, but you do, because you know who's a veteran, you know who works multiple jobs, if it is multiple jobs. You know who is self-identifying as queer. You know who is facing economic hardship. You just know more about them. And it almost feels, not to take this over, but it almost feels like a cheat and like a disingenuous one, because they don't know this much about me. And yet all of a sudden I know a lot about them and appreciate them on that level. So it's a really big trust exercise, and I feel like for the most part you're rewarded really well for it. Not everybody responds, but you know, everybody's got their own boundaries and walls, and what are you going to do, right? So yeah, I highly recommend it for everybody thinking about it moving forward, and Marlene is the person I thank when I bring it up. So thank you very much, Marlene.
By the way, I have just a clean template copy of that Who's in Class form that I'd be happy to share or forward to anyone who wants to try that out. And of course you can adapt it and adjust it to fit your class. But are there any questions or comments? Yes.
I have a question about trying to the concept of multiplying speakers from or of authors from diverse backgrounds, and how explicitly or not explicitly do you reference that while giving the material? Like, do you say, like, make a statement about it, or do you do it intentionally but not necessarily overtly?
Yeah, that's a great question. Angela, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I would say it's just, like, I would say that would be up to the instructor for sure. And I definitely, I mean, I had a class where it was a component of an assignment we were talking about like citational violence and stuff like that. And it was a decolonizing anthropology class. So it was already the topic, you know? But I actually had that same thought coming over, like, would I put some kind of identifying material on every single author in my syllabus? Because that would be probably how you would do that, right? Like, you know, this is, you know, cis white male or whatever. I would say that was just like your own judgment call. But in the book, they just talk about, just look at your syllabus. Are there voices that are missing, especially voices that you see represented in your class? And how can you let those students know, if you know enough about them, to have a role model, or to know, like, you know, there are other people here. It's not just this group. You know, and like in like a lefty social science class, like, how can I include more conservative voices? You know, like, that's important as well, because I want all my students to know that they have a place, and that, you know, this discipline really can be applied to their life experiences. But anyway, that's my long answer.
Yeah. Does anyone else have something they want to add? Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
What I do is, yes, take a look at the syllabus and make sure that I'm including diverse voices, but I don't necessarily label anything in any which way. But when we're having the class discussion, that background information, if it has informed the writing, that just kind of naturally comes out as needed.
Yeah, and also I think that for students where that representation matters, I feel like they notice it, whether you call it out or not. So, yeah, that's a great question. Any other comments or questions or examples? Andy, yeah, let's hear from.
I like to have the inclusion is great. It's nice to have the students visit their aides during their office hours, but they won't go. How can you get them to go without assigning academic points?
Any ideas for office hours and getting students to come, or other ways other than office hours to help them engage? Yeah, Matt Sanders, Jenny Wilmore, I'm not sure if they recorded their session, but there was one about office hours.
She was doing academic credit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We'll go here and then here. Yeah.
So I teach a lot of, or have taught a lot of stats-related classes, and when you make part of the class, like a skill that is required for the class, be linked